Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine, well, the most improbable thing you can think of happening.
Right.
Like, a tiny local bookstore suddenly outselling Amazon overnight? Or maybe your friend's garage band headlining Wembley?
Yeah, something totally out there.
That's kind of the level of shock we saw in football back in 2016, when Leicester City won the English Premier League.
It still sounds incredible saying it.
Doesn't it? Before that season even started, the bookies had them at 5,000 to 1 odds to win the title. 5,000 to 1.
Which is just astronomical. You were statistically more likely to find Elvis alive or discover the Loch Ness Monster.
Exactly. And it wasn't just that people didn't think they'd win it. Most pundits, most experts, they were actually tipping Leicester for relegation, to go down.
Yeah, they thought they'd finish near the bottom.
And yet somehow, against all the predictions, against all logic,
Yeah.
they lifted the trophy, became champions.
And what makes this story so fascinating, so compelling, is how it all happened. It wasn't like a slow build over years. It just exploded. So we've been digging into this, looking at analysis, firsthand accounts, fan reactions, trying to understand how this football fairy tale actually became reality.
What were the ingredients? The tactics, the mindset, the circumstances?
Exactly. Our mission today is really to try and pull apart those key elements, that allowed this absolutely monumental upset to happen.
And I think to really grasp how huge this was, you kind of have to rewind a bit. Look at the season before, 2014-15.
Yeah, context is crucial here.
Leicester had just come up to the Premier League, newly promoted, and honestly, they spent most of that year really struggling. Deep, deep trouble.
They looked absolutely doomed for large parts of it. Certainties for relegation going straight back down.
But then, and this is where it gets really interesting, something just clicked right at the end. They went on this unbelievable run.
An amazing escape, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They won 7 of their last 9 games.
Yeah.
Pulled themselves out of the fire.
Like Houdini. But even with that incredible finish.
Even with that, nobody saw this coming the next season. That escape was largely seen as, well, maybe a bit of a fluke. A desperate last-gasp surge.
The expectation was, okay, they survived, but next year, it's going to be another hard slog, another fight against relegation.
Absolutely. They were still viewed as, fundamentally a small club, punching above their weight just by being there. Underdogs. Written off.
Okay, so fast forward to the summer of 2015. Big change. Nigel Pearson, the manager who'd overseen that great escape, he's out.
Yep.
And in comes Claudio Ranieri. Now, the reaction at the time, it wasn't exactly overwhelming enthusiasm, was it?
No, definitely not. There were a lot of raised eyebrows. Plenty of skepticism, actually.
People knew Ranieri, of course. He'd managed big clubs, Chelsea, Juventus, Inter Milan.
But he also had this sort of reputation, maybe unfairly, as the tinkerman.
Yeah.
Someone who maybe couldn't quite get teams over the line to win the really big trophies.
And his last job before Leicester, well, it hadn't gone well.
No, his time with the Greek national team was pretty disastrous, frankly. He hadn't managed in England for over 10 years either, so people were asking, is this really the guy?
Some were even predicting he wouldn't last until Christmas.
Which seems incredible now. But what's really interesting is Ranieri's first move, his initial approach.
Right, because he walks into this club where, okay, they just survived relegation, but the players, the existing coaches, they'd clearly built something strong together during that fight.
A real bond, yeah.
And instead of coming in, new broom sweeps clean, bringing in all his own people, he does something pretty unusual.
Very unusual in football management. He kept the core coaching staff, Steve Walsh, Craig Shakespeare, Mike Stoll, the guys who knew the players who'd been key to that survival.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? That continuity is rare when a new manager arrives.
It really is. And the players noticed. Kasper Schmeichel, the goalkeeper, he mentioned how Ranieri didn't just storm in with a load of new rules on day one.
He observed first.
Yeah, he took his time, watched, listened, showed respect for what was already working well. He built on that foundation. And then he started making his tactical tweaks.
Okay, so tactically, under Pearson, they'd often used 3 central defenders, right? A back 3.
That's right, yeah. Often a 3-5-2 or similar.
Ranieri changed that. He went to a 4-4-1-1. So for those of us maybe not deep into football tactics, what did that actually mean on the pitch? How did it change how they played?
Well, think of it like this. You've got a flat back 4 defenders, then 4 midfielders across the park, then one player kind of linking midfield and attack, playing just behind the main striker up top.
Okay, so a more kind of traditional shape.
In some ways, yes, but it was how they used it. It gave them this really solid, compact defensive structure. Two banks of four, very hard to break down. Teams found it difficult to play through them.
Right, they soak up the pressure.
Exactly. But crucially, that solid base allowed them to just explode on the counterattack. They could win the ball back deep, and then boom, they'd transition super quickly.
Using pace.
Absolutely. They had lightning pace up front. So the system was perfectly set up to defend stubbornly and then hit teams on the break with speed and precision. It played perfectly to their strengths.
That makes a lot of sense. Because when you look at the stats for that season, Leicester often didn't have much possession of the ball.
No, they were often quite low on possession stats compared to their opponents.
But they let the other team have it, almost invited them on, and then pounced. Their numbers for interceptions, for tackles won, they were incredibly high.
Masters of winning the ball back in key areas, and then, like you say, it was instant. Forward passes, quick transitions.
I heard they even had a specific training drill for it, something about getting the ball forward quickly, making recovery runs.
Yeah, Ranieri focused drills on exactly that. Yeah. Win it, get it forward fast, support the attack, but also get back into shape immediately if the attack breaks down.
Yeah.
Relentless work rate.
And it wasn't just a rigid system, was it? It seemed like Ranieri really tailored it to the players he had.
That's the key insight, I think. He wasn't forcing players into a system they didn't suit. He looked at the squad and thought, right, how do we maximize these talents?
Like Vardy's speed. Mahrez's skill.
Precisely. And in midfield, you had N'Golo Kante, an absolute phenomenon that season. His energy, his ability to just hoover up the ball, break up play, and then start the attack, he was fundamental.
The engine room.
Totally. So the 4-4-1-1 wasn't just a formation on paper. It was a way to unleash Kante's ball-winning, Vardy's pace, Mahrez's dribbling. It all just clicked.
And speaking of those players, Jamie Vardy, I mean, his story is just pure Hollywood, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Unbelievable. Playing non-league football, working in a factory just a few years earlier.
And then, in this Premier League season, he goes and breaks the record for scoring in consecutive games, 11 matches in a row.
It was just surreal. Every week, you're thinking, surely he can't score again. And he did. He captured everyone's imagination.
And Riyad Mahrez, too. Another revelation.
Yeah, signed from Le Havre in the French second division for, what, less than £500,000. Peanuts in football terms.
And he just exploded. Flair, incredible goals, assists. He won the PFA Player of the Year award. Just dazzling.
And you can't forget the defense. Wes Morgan, the captain, and Robert Huth alongside him. That central defensive partnership was like a rock. So solid, so commanding.
It really sounds like every single player just hit their absolute peak performance at the same time.
It certainly seemed that way. But it wasn't just about individual stars suddenly shining brighter than ever.
No. What else?
There's this incredible team spirit, a real togetherness. You can just feel it watching them play. They fought for every ball for each other.
Everyone bought in.
Completely. They bought into Ranieri's methods, into the team strategy. Ranieri himself put a massive emphasis on attitude, on hard work, sometimes even more than the result itself in training.
He built a really positive vibe, didn't he?
He did. He seemed to take the pressure off, made it enjoyable. He had this charm about him.
Yeah, I remember the stories. The famous pizza promise.
Exactly. He promised the players pizza if they kept a clean sheet, stopped the opposition scoring.
Which they eventually did.
They did. And he actually took them out for pizza. It sounds like a small thing, maybe a bit silly.
But it shows his man management style, right?
Totally. It built camaraderie, made players feel appreciated, made them strive for those little collective goals. It wasn't just tactics. It was about creating a happy, motivated camp. A real team.
Okay, so you have this amazing internal dynamic, the tactics, the players hitting form, the team spirit. But there were other factors at play too, weren't there? External factors.
Definitely. You can't ignore what was happening elsewhere in the league that season, the so-called big clubs, the usual suspects.
The ones we'd expect to be challenging for the title: Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal.
Yeah, they all had, well, pretty poor seasons by their usual standards. Chelsea, who were the defending champions, had a complete meltdown, especially in the first half of the season.
There are rumors of issues behind the scenes there.
Yeah, it seemed like there was some internal strife, and their form just collapsed. City and United were inconsistent, never really putting a sustained challenge together. Arsenal flickered but faded.
So the established elite kind of stumbled.
They did, and that definitely created a vacuum, an opening at the top. But, and this is really important, you can't just say Leicester won because the others failed.
Right. Leicester still had to do their part. A big part.
An enormous part. They were incredibly consistent. Week after week, they turned up, put in a performance, and usually got a result. While others were dropping points unexpectedly, Leicester just kept grinding.
And they beat the big teams, too, didn't they? It wasn't just beating the teams around them.
No, they got crucial wins against the top sides. That 3-1 win away at Manchester City in February, that felt huge.
Yeah, I remember that one. That was the moment where people really started to think, hang on, could they actually?
Exactly. It wasn't just a fluke anymore. It was a statement. We're serious contenders. We can beat anyone, anywhere.
And that must have just fueled the momentum even more.
Immensely. Confidence just grew and grew with every victory. And crucially, because nobody expected anything from them at the start.
There was no pressure.
Well, not in the same way the big clubs experience it. They weren't supposed to be winning. So the players seemed to play with a certain freedom, almost an enjoyment of defying expectations.
Less fear of failure, perhaps.
Perhaps. It was like they were riding this wave. As some of the analysis points out, success breeds success, becomes self-reinforcing. They started winning, which built belief, which led to more wins. A virtuous cycle.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, almost. They started to genuinely believe they could do it.
And maybe, just maybe, their opponents started to doubt themselves a bit when facing this relentless Leicester team that just wouldn't go away.
It's like they were playing with house money, in a way. Nothing to lose.
In the early stages, certainly. Later on, of course, the pressure did build as the title became a real possibility. But they handled it incredibly well.
And we touched on Mahrez and Conte. That points to another key factor, recruitment.
Absolutely. The club's scouting and recruitment during that period was exceptional. Finding gems like Mahrez, Conte, even Vardy earlier. Identifying talent others had missed, often for relatively small fees.
Finding players who fit the system and the ethos.
Exactly. It wasn't just about talent. It was about finding the right kind of players, hardworking, hungry, with the right character. That highlights the importance of good ownership and a really clear, smart recruitment strategy working hand in hand with the manager.
You also had players from their own academy pushing for places, adding competition.
Yeah, that internal competition keeps everyone on their toes.
Okay, one final point that sometimes gets mentioned. The fixture list. Did they have an advantage there?
Well, the argument goes that because Leicester weren't playing in European competitions, the Champions League or Europa League.
Which means loads of extra midweek games, travel.
Right. And they also went out of the domestic cup competitions relatively early. So the theory is they had fewer games overall compared to the top teams who were fighting on multiple fronts.
Meaning they could focus purely on the league and maybe field their strongest team more consistently. Less fatigue.
That's the idea. And look, maybe having fresher legs week in, week out helped a tiny bit. It probably didn't hurt.
But it wasn't the main reason.
I really don't think you can put it down to that in any significant way. Every team has fixture challenges. What was more important was how Leicester managed their squad. Their fitness levels were superb, and they maintained that incredible consistency and intensity almost every single week. Regardless of who they were playing or how many days rest they'd had, they were just relentless.
So when you pull it all together, you've got the rock-bottom expectations, almost zero pressure initially.
Yep.
You've got a clever, experienced manager coming in, keeping key staff, building an amazing team spirit.
The Tinkerman becomes the Thinkerman.
Exactly. You've got tactics perfectly suited to the players, key players hitting unbelievable peaks in form simultaneously.
Vardy, Mahrez, Conte, just world-class that season.
You have the traditional giants all having an off year, creating that power vacuum.
A bit of weakness at the top, yeah.
Add in smart recruitment, finding hidden gems, and this snowballing momentum where belief just takes over.
It's like all the stars align perfectly.
It really is. It created this perfect storm. The result. One of the most astonishing feel-good stories in the entire history of sport.
Without question. Leicester City's 2015-16 title win remains utterly extraordinary. A proper football fairy tale. You couldn't write it. It's probably the greatest upset in team sports ever.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Was this just a complete one-off? A unique, impossible-to-repeat alignment of planets? You know, the internal factors hitting perfectly, just as the external environment weakened.
Or does the Leicester story offer something more enduring, a kind of blueprint, maybe, showing what can be achieved with incredible team cohesion, the right tactical approach, smart planning, and just sheer unshakable belief, even when you're the massive underdog?
Can other underdogs, maybe not just in sport, but in any competitive field, look at Leicester and draw real inspiration, real lessons? It's fascinating to think about that balance.
It absolutely is. And whatever the answer, their story continues to inspire. It challenges our ideas about limits, about what's possible when people dare to defy all expectations.